Next question says, you mentioned previously in a coaching call that we should always either be in a bulking or a cutting phase, even if it's a slow one. In which training blocks would it be best to cut or bulk in order to optimize strength progress throughout the cycle? My specific situation right now is that I'm 5'10", I weigh 85 or 86 kilos at around 15 to 18% body fat. I want to compete at 83 without having to use any kind of water cut. And at the end of the next cycle, I plan to move up to the 93 kilo weight class. This is tough to answer in the context of guided programming. Now, if you've been keeping up with my emerging strategies lectures, let me start there just because it's a bit more simple. What I've been doing and in some ways recommending is that we go caloric surplus for the development cycles and caloric deficit for the pivot cycles. And we can adjust the amounts of those so that overall your weight is moving in the direction that we want. If we want you to be losing weight overall, we can have a very modest surplus during the development cycle and a more severe deficit during the pivot. And your overall weight is going to trend down over subsequent cycles. If we want you to be gaining weight, we can have a more aggressive surplus and a less severe deficit, and the overall trend is going to go the other way. So that's one thing that I like about the rhythm of emerging strategies, is that it allows that surplus deficit swinging, and we can manipulate your overall direction of your weight, basically, while still allowing you to be in a surplus during your development cycles and a deficit during your pivot cycles. I've been doing that myself for the last several months, and I'm actually, like, my overall weight is trending down, but I've still managed to be in a surplus during my development cycles, which is nice. It's definitely a nice thing. We're just kind of manipulating the magnitude of a surplus, and I think it's going to depend on which coach you talk to, how they're going to define bulking, cutting, maintaining, and things like that, right? I'm talking about, are we technically gaining weight or are we technically losing weight? Usually it's not staying strictly constant. There's always some fluctuation, right? Are we talking about a very modest amount of weight increase or weight decrease or a bigger amount? So that doesn't help you very much because you're not using emerging strategies. I would like to apply a similar thought process to what you're doing. It's just that since you won't be spending as much time in deloaded periods of training as we do in emerging strategies, that same rhythm won't work for you. So you will have training cycles, training blocks that will have to be done in a caloric deficit. You want to try to plan those out strategically. Try to plan those out so that, sometimes you're going to need to be in a deficit, and that deficit's going to run right up to a competition. That's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world to be in a deficit that leads you to a competition. It's nice if you can avoid it, but that's just not the reality for a lot of people. So you're going to want to manipulate your caloric surplus and your caloric deficits and things like that so that you can have a gentle deficit or potentially a surplus going into the competition. You'll want to save your more severe deficits for further away from the competition. In general, that's how I would structure it. But I don't think that you need to spend long periods of time in either stage, but that's just kind of where I'm at currently.